Hello and welcome back to Hindustan Astrology. I'm Katya, and in today's presentation, we're going to talk about the fixed star Acubens. Now, this is at 19 degrees of Sidereal Cancer, and this star has quite a bite to it. It can bring a lot of situations in somebody's life that will bring about karma very quickly. And this is through one's reputation. There seems to be an association, with people that are what we would call, people that are in the news, people that are gossiped about. But there's a very good reason for that. These people are definitely here to help us to transform. And that's part of the meaning of the ill repute associated with this star, is that it brings to light some of the shadows of things that need to change in ourselves and in society. So the nakshatra that is associated with this is Ashlesha. And so I have back with me my dear teacher, Dr. Santhip Kanholy, and he's going to talk to us about Ashlesha nakshatra and how this star can be seen through it so clearly. So thank you, Santhip ji. Thank you for coming back.
Namaste, Katya. Namaste to all your viewers. Good to be here again. So it's interesting. I think here today you're going to kick off a new series on fixed stars and so forth, how they can be of great value even to Vedic astrologers. In fact, the concept of yoga taras, in which the actual star position you see in the sky becomes an important thing. So used to be in older astrology, where the astronomy was becoming important. Planets, any planet close to a particular yoga tara or a bright spot of that star, the actual location of that particular fixed star becomes very important. So that's why the 19 degrees becomes a very important thing in Cancer. And as we know in Vedic astrology, the nakshatra that is linked with 19 degrees of Cancer is Ashlesha nakshatra. Ashlesha nakshatra, first of all, let me tell it this way. If any planet is located very close to this 19 degrees, say you have a planet at 17 degrees, 18 degrees, and 19 degrees, or 20 degree, 21 degree, the influence of this particular star will be very prominent in your chart. That's the first thing I want people to be aware about. The other thing is that, of course, Ashlesha nakshatra is the nakshatra that is connected with the protective aspect of the mother. So Cancer is the sign of the mother. Pushya is the nurturing aspect of the mother, but Ashlesha is the aspect of mother who's concerned about protecting the child. So that particular influence is very strong. So quite easily you will find natives here involved with protecting. You will find a lot of natives involved with professions that lead with government, especially working for the local government of sorts many times. You'll find very lot of powerful healers here, very powerful natives with who are excellent in politics and so forth. And of course, Ashlesha, the god or the ruler of Ashlesha, the nakshatra deity linked with Ashlesha is actually the Nagas. And you can see, I think you could also speak a little bit about the picture you have behind you. There is a go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so the picture I chose for today was Serpent Mound because the Nagas are the deity of Ashlesha. And so Acubens, because it's, within Ashlesha, embodies the serpent energy, the sacred serpent. And this particular mound was used for astronomical purposes. This is how they determined when the winter and summer solstices were and the spring and fall equinoxes were, by how the stars align with different points of the serpent.
Yeah, so again, the serpentine feature, right? So usually serpents or nagas are considered to be very old forces of creation, actually. Very old forces of creation. And more importantly, I would say the serpent is also connected with a lot of mystical knowledge. You find that the nagas also give you powerful knowledge, powerful wealth. Many times these natives are excellent with jewelry design. You begin to see they are also involved with They find one way or the other, they come across gemstones more, that kind of thing is something you begin to see. Ashlesha is also having a very serpentine nature. So the symbol of the nakshatra itself is a serpent coiled up, a coiled up serpent. So usually you find that in general, these nakshatra natives is the aspect of mother that is hugging you all the time. That makes you comfortable hugging the other person very strongly and all that. So of course, this hugging can be good from a mother, but from a bouncer, the bouncer can hug you and literally throw you out of the bar or the club or not, right? So that
Right.
kind of thing
Or
also
like how a snake can squeeze you to death.
exactly correct. So that particular aspect of protective aspect of Ashlesha is something that can be very strong. And in general, because this is the nakshatra where Mars is getting debilitated, these nakshatra natives have to deal with a lot of Martian themes in their life. So karma with siblings is at a prominent aspect in their life. They might be the diplomat within the family. They might have to deal with frustrations with their siblings and so forth. That kind of energy can be something they'll have to learn to deal with. And of course, from a material aspect, they might have a default karma with land itself. Now, because Mars is a planet of fire, in some cases I've seen, the land getting burned, house getting burned, things like that also. So the actual problems with fire also is something I've seen. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see what the actual fixed star Acubens is about. So let's get into that.
Yeah, sure.
Katya.
And I want to add also that the snake bite, the poison that comes from it, because this nakshatra is ruled by Mercury, and as you said in the past, Mercury has a secret occult side to him. And here he can study black magic, even using like snake poison to heal a sickness. That could be seen here too, because this is about transformation through either squeezing or through the venom. And so it's a very transformative star. So without further ado, let's take a look at my presentation on Acubens. Okay, so the chart that I chose to investigate for this star is the new Queen Camilla of Windsor. And this is Camilla Parker Bowles was her previous name. Now she is Camilla Windsor. So let's just review Acubens and what its meanings are. Acubens sits currently at 19.2 degrees of sidereal Cancer. This is the clinging star. And in the Ptolemy categories of fixed stars, this is considered a Saturn-Mercury star. So Saturn stars, it's everything that we associate with Saturn, right? The 3Ds, divorce, death, dying, but karma and a maturity as well. And Mercury stars are, they are communicative and literary and also have that secret occult aspect that we talked about. So these are the meanings that I pulled up in my research: profound liar, thief, blackguard, scandal and slander, and it is said to cause trouble and disgrace. So it seems that Mercury, announces the difficulties of Saturn and with this star. Now, something that we talked about earlier when I was reviewing this presentation with you is that when we're talking about somebody who has a lot of scandals and who has a bad reputation, we have to remember that they're human beings too. And that if they have been set up as an example of something, then that was their destiny. And we have to have some grace and some humility when we're talking about them, because this is their life, right? We can't just say, oh, this person is just about scandal. Well, no, this is one part of this person. And so when you see this in a chart, just remember that, this element's going to be there, and try to dig deeper and look into the family history. And this is what I've done with Camilla, is that she has a great grandmother that we're going to talk about. So So here are the meanings for Acubens. This is the alpha star of Cancer. It's at 4.2. It's a 4.2 magnitude red and white binary star. So there's two stars there, okay? That might be some of the volatility I found with stars that are two, it's actually two. There's a volatility going on there. It's located on the left claw of the crab. And so we can see here, it's down here. Comes from the Arabic term al-zubana, which means the claws. It's been called the sheltering or hiding place and gives activity, malevolence, and poison, making its natives liars and criminals. Nurturing and preserving, but nervous nature, good for public affairs. Shows a witch doctor or someone who is persecuted for using poisons to heal. Can be the victim of a witch hunt. People with a low consciousness will get the negative aspects of the star, but someone with a higher consciousness will transmute this energy into gold. And I would say also particularly the star, because it is about transformation. So if there's effort made to have a higher consciousness, then they can turn it around and, help bring transformation to other people as well. Now, Acubens is spectrally as Venus. So what that means is that, according to Ptolemy, the new stars that were associated with Venus are on the perimeter of a constellation, but it's in the claw. And so this makes its reputation portending malevolence and poisoning. Acubens, the main star of Cancer, in the scissors of the crab, has a Martian nature and a strong blending in of Saturnian influence, conveying an unbalanced and jumpy nature. So here they're adding in Venus and Mars as well, right? And I think this goes back to that binary star, is that there's a lot of potent energy. If the chart is a disharmonious one to people affected by it, and especially if Acubens is in conjunction with Mars, Sun, Uranus, or Pluto, this makes for an unsettled mentality and helplessness. The tip of the forward southern leg is Acubens, as we discussed, familiar in astrology as a Saturn-Mercury type, thus more cautious than the Martian quality type of the beta star. Though the piercing or stinging notia, he's supposed to be motion, in the Latin form of the name still contains the note of attack. The crab, lobster, and the scorpion were once all thought to have stings from their somewhat similar appearances. So as you were discussing, this is the protective part of the mother of Cancer, and this is the part that will attack in order to protect its child. It's also suggested, however, that the name originates from the Arabic al-zubana, the claw, and indeed this star does represent the southern of the crab's claws. We shall find later that several more Saturn-Mercury stars are on the points of various weaponry carried by the characters in the heavens. So, in other words, constellations that have weapons will be Saturn-Mercury type stars. So one significance of Acubens is the enforced use of applied intelligence. Again, back to that Mercury occult powers, right? When finding oneself in combat at someone else's behest, as we may say, the crab's front legs find itself driven by the Mars al-Tarf on the back leg, which is the other star that's at the back leg of Cancer. But a generally more positive quality to read from Acubens is that of a sharp intellect and ease of coming to grips with problems, for which one might earn quite high public renown. But again, there's the note of doing this under pressure of others demanding from behind. So there's a sense of, probably this star on the back leg, the Mars star, pushing forward, right? Acubens star rules the outer tissues of the left side of the kidneys in the human body. And isn't that interesting? An interesting place in the body, the outer tissues of the left side of the kidneys. Well, kidneys purify the blood, right? And I've always thought kidneys were associated with Libra. So this is another way. Again, this is, all stuff that I dug up because this isn't the Vedic part, this all comes from Ptolemy. This all comes from the Greek. And this is stuff that's been preserved from, the Persian Empire, but it's just, it's a very small part.
Yeah, here I want to add one interesting thing. With the left side, as you mentioned, if you can go back to the previous slide, you can see the left slide usually in general is connected with the feminine side, or the the female current and so forth in the yogic thing. So you can see in general, any planet placed in Cancer sign has the potential to affect the left side, left energy current more. In general, because it is there is a different way of looking at the zodiac by making Leo and Cancer at the top of the zodiac as the head part and all that. So when you make it that particular way, all the signs from Leo to Capricorn will represent the right side of the body. Left side of the body can be represented by Cancer, or going in the counterclockwise direction from Cancer to Aquarius and so forth. So and that's a very interesting thing to see here with the left side being indicated, called out here directly. Of course, kidneys is interesting. Perhaps you could say that moon is actually nodal kidneys, because definitely kidneys linked with purifying, getting rid of toxins and so forth. So that's a very interesting thing to play out. And it was very interesting how we mentioned the Mars altar, because it's a binary star of sorts. The other star is also one that is actually pushing it forward. So it could be that these natives might have a
well, Altarp is on the back leg of Cancer, so it's not the binary star with it, but part of the system. It's like the energy of the crab moving forward, the back leg pushing the front legs forward, and this is in the left claw, so it's like that energy of
right.
Because you know how a crab goes; he doesn't go straight ahead; he goes sideways,
right. So it's interesting that the job of the claw of the crab is to actually protect the entire crab. So you can see how these natives might be protective of the entire family, even the other members of the family. Or the other members of the family could be the force that is instigating them to attack or protect, kind of thing, to utilize the claw function and so forth. Actually, that's very interesting observation for sure. Yeah. But go ahead, Katya. Thank you for that.
Sure. Okay, Camilla Parker Bowles. So if you're not familiar with her, she is now the Queen of England. And yes, we can call her the Queen and not just the Queen consort. One of the TikTok creators I follow, Matter of Fact, she went to an extensive video about how, yes, this is Queen Camilla, not Queen consort Camilla. So when you're speaking about her, she is the queen. And this is something that, a lot of people say, oh, Diana will be turning over in her grave. Well, no, I think that, poor Camilla. And this is the thing. This is the whole point of what I was saying before, is that we can't just attack these people that have bad reputations. They're playing a role in their family history that needs to be brought attention to. And so no hate on Camilla here. I'm not hating on her, okay? Now, this is, I did get a firm time of birth, July 17th, 1947 at 7:10 a.m. in London. This makes her Cancer ascendant with Pushya. She's got Saturn in Ashlesha, and she's got Pluto right there, almost exactly on Acubens. And then Sun is also in Cancer. So right here, we see there's this heaviness. There's this heaviness on her ascendant, and having that Acubens right there. Well, Pushya Lagna, shows that she is very wealthy. But all of this together, this is, Saturn's karma, right? And so this is the karma that she's wrapped up in around this star. Dark and brooding. Pluto on the ascendant can show somebody who is manipulative and somebody who is not a popular person, because they're just not the life of the party. They're not, out there dancing on tables, they're kind of, a lot of times they'll have their head down, a darkness. There's not a light to their face. and while, Camilla was very beautiful when she was younger, I think as she's aged, she doesn't project radiance, she kind of withdraws into herself, even though the sun is right here on the ascendant. I think this is showing a lot of power through family. And she's got a Kala Sarpa Yoga between the 11th and 5th houses. Somebody with Rahu in the 11th is going to be a bit of a social climber, and especially with Mars there. She definitely is, loves, she probably has a lot more male friends than female friends. Loves to ride around in cars and, smoke her cigarettes, very Rahu, hang out with her friends and party. 5th house, K2 in the 5th house. I think she's had difficult relationships with her children. There's just kind of a lack there. Wherever K2 sits in the chart, there's kind of a lack of that thing. And I think there's just, just a lack of closeness. Anurata's the star of friendship. So probably, she wishes there was more friendship with her children, what I would think. And then Saturn, here rules the 7th and 8th houses. 7th is partnerships, 8th is inheritance, and she starts her life in Rahu Mahadasha, which is when her great grandmother died about 2 months later after she was born. And they were both in their Rahu Mahadasha. And we did look at, we did not have a firm birth time for her great grandmother, but we played with different dashas. And we figured out that she was pretty much going to be in Rahu when she died, regardless of what hour she was born. So that's significant. And they both had Venus in Gemini, and Alice Keppel, her great grandmother, and she was the mistress to King Edward VII. So when I started researching this, what I was seeing was that because her great grandmother was the mistress to the king, they actually had a really good relationship with the queen. It was at a time when arranged marriages were expected, and you were not expected to be happy emotionally in your arranged marriage. But if you were a part of royalty, you had to do this in order to keep the families and the inheritance and everything in check, right? And so they allowed their husbands to have mistresses. And after her generation, that stopped. And that's when we saw the abdication of the throne by Edward the Eighth, I believe it was, the next one, because he wanted to marry a divorcee, and he wasn't allowed. And then here we come forward all the way to Charles and Diana, and it's the same story. These poor people, it's like nobody is as poor as the royal family emotionally, really, because they have no control over their life. They have to do what they're told, or they get ostracized, kicked out, just like Prince Harry did. And you have to feel sorry. I feel sorry for them because they were born into this. This isn't something you can just change overnight. So it's taken all these generations, right, for them to come to realize that these are people too, and they should be allowed to marry who they love. And even though, Camilla was manipulative, they did things behind Diana's back and stuff like that. Ultimately, it was because they were trying to fulfill their destiny. And that is what I think, a lot of things in this life try to stop you from fulfilling your destiny. And when people talk about you and say bad things about you, that can stop you, right? That can stop you from doing what you know is right and just kind of towing the line. And so the dashas, we have King Edward VIII, which was the next generation. The one that abdicated the throne was on December 10th of 1936. Camilla's chart began in 1934. So what I have discovered, now this is just something that I discovered. Nobody taught me this. This is something that from talking to people at expos, from doing readings for people online. If you are born into a dasha that starts way before you're born, this back here, this was something either going on with your parents, or it was something going on with your family, somebody else in your family. But there was an event that happened here that took, she took notice of up in heaven and said, okay, this is when I'm going to start, but I'm not going to jump into my body until here. Right. And so her chart began in 1934, but it was 1936 in that same Rahu dasha that King Edward VIII abdicated the throne. And so, and as we discussed, Rahu's in the 11th. This is showing her, proclivity to being around the royals. And, Rahu is what we're here to do, right? Jupiter is the indicator of the spouse, shows that she met her future husband in a large, beautiful houses. And indeed, they often had secret liaisons in their friends' country estates. I'm talking about Prince Charles and her. That's how they were getting around, Diana. And then they began dating in her 20s in 1970. Now, this was prior to Diana, right? This is the first time when they were in college. And the beginning of her Saturn Mahadasha, end of first Bhukti. So here, 70, right here. Yeah, but right here is where they started dating. And here we are, Saturn's, very close to Acubens. So for her, even though, this set her up, this is when the events started to happen. And of course, we know, Pluto doesn't rule the dashas, so we can't use that. But the fact that Saturn is conjunct Pluto and exactly on Acubens, pretty telling. Is there anything you wanted to say?
I think the technique which you looked at identify the beginning period of any dasha of your birth at the moment of your birth. It's a very good technique actually. So you can look at not only the Rahu period when it began for her, technically 13 years before her birth. Even the other sub-periods would also work. You could make predictions for the entire family based on the Rahu Jupiter, Rahu Saturn, Rahu Mercury, Rahu Ketu, Rahu Venus. That can be done actually. So it's a very interesting observation. Definitely you can apply that. And of course, here you can see, as you mentioned, Acubens in the fixed star systems. Saturn Mercury is the actual planets linked with Acubens, and you actually have Saturn here. But from a Vedic astrology perspective, her Saturn period actually began. That's when the whole, being accused of or secret kind of affairs and all that got triggered actually. So it's very interesting to see that kind of thing. And Ashlesha in general, planets in Cancer does have, they are, let's put it this way, Moon is the ruler of Cancer. Moon is active in the night time. So usually the tendency to do things in a hidden manner kind of thing is stronger for Cancer natives in general also. So that's a normal thing. So since she has Saturn, since she was going through a Saturn Dasha, it was normal that doing something that was hidden from the world kind of aspect can also be seen. But as you mentioned, though, this was she was in a relationship kind of thing. But just like it was a complicated relationship, as you mentioned also, because they were in their 20s. Charles was also not yet to get married and all that kind of thing also.
Yeah. And interesting that her Venus is in the 12th house. Well, Venus does great in the 12th house, because it's a Jupiter house and can show wealth overseas, but also 12th house is hidden things and bed pleasures. And having Mercury retrograde there, they had to come back a second time for their relationship for it to work. Now, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, of course. Here you can see the Mercury, the other lord of Acubens, going to Punvasu Nakshatra. How the actual thing had to clear up, how she had to go through a karma, and then it was the Mercury part, perhaps things could have opened up and all that. Of course, Venus in 12th house can mean relationships that are hidden and all that. So it makes perfect sense also. It was also mentioned that it was in their friends' estates and so forth. They had to rely on a lot of their friends also for their secret liaisons and all that, because Mercury is also friends in general. That is also one more thing you can actually see here, actually.
Right. And it's, and having this Kala Sarpa yoga, this is the serpent. This is, what
Yeah.
she is here to do. And having this energy all concentrated here. It's not easy. It's not easy being Camilla. I feel for her, even though I love Diana. I grew up with Princess Diana. I wanted to be just like her, right? But it was just they all nobody's to blame. What's that song? No one is to blame, right? It's just I guess that's why they call it a tragedy. Now, I wanted to take a look at her Mercury as well. Hold on a second. Because this is the second, it's a Saturn Mercury star, right? So we look at Saturn. Now we're looking at Mercury. This is when they started dating, and and they were cheating. So 1986, Charles and Camilla started dating, beginning of her Mercury Mahadasha. Here we are, right at the beginning. I mean, it's just you can't make this stuff up, man. I swear to God, this is why I do astrology. Because when I look at this, my mind is blown, and I'm just okay, I'm. So Mercury rules the 12th house of secrets and hidden things, and the 3rd house of media, and her Neptune is there. And this is also contributing to her bad reputation, right? Lies, deception, scandal, that's all Neptune. And it's in the 3rd house of media. Moon in Ardra shows teardrops, and conjunct Venus in Ardra, it's sadness around love. Mercury retrograde in Punarvasu shows that it would be the 2nd time that they're successful in love. Actually, it was really the 3rd time, if you really, get down to it, because they were not successful here. It wasn't until later that they were successful.
Yeah, so Punarvasu sometimes sometimes mean 2 or 3 times repetition also. Need not always be the
Really?
2nd time. Yeah, sometimes it can be 3 times also. That's also normal here.
Interesting. Well, it's kind of like, I guess, a transit. When a planet goes retrograde, it passes a point, goes retrograde, it passes it again, and then the 3rd time it goes over again.
So yeah, perhaps that retrograde planet intensify that energy further. That is also a good observation. Yes, Mercury being retrograde here also. Yeah, true.
Yeah. So that's when they started dating the 2nd time. And then I'm not sure when they got married. That's something I forgot to look up. But this is when she became queen. Okay. So we have 2022, Venus, Jupiter. Venus is in, Jupiter is in Venus's sign of Libra in her 4th house of the homeland. Jupiter rules her 6th and 9th houses. So, royals, it's all about service, right? I mean, it is your job. It's not like, got a membership to the country club and you're going to retire for the rest of your life. This is about serving and higher ideals, right? The law. I mean, 9th house is the law. So it activated those houses, her bhukti. And then Saturn rules her 7th house of marriage and sits in her 1st house conjunct Acubens. So, I know what I was thinking. I was thinking about Saturn being in Capricorn right now and that being opposite her Saturn, and how that definitely was an activation of this star. You see anything else you want to say?
Yeah, if you make the moon lagna, right? If you count from the moon, you can see how Venus and Mercury are placed in good houses related to the moon. So Venus would be in the 1st house from moon. Jupiter, the Antardasha planet, is actually 5th house away from the moon actually. So that is also improving this thing. 5th house also a throne house actually. 5th house can show power and authority also. So you can see how this time period was very favorable for her from a moon chart actually. Moon can also indicate homeland karma. So that is also one more thing you can see how she attained the power and all that. You can see it's very interesting to see it was the husband's mother's her partner's mother's role, so or the queen had to die for her to get the thing. So that's an interesting kind of thing if you combine the natural zodiac thing here actually. So for instance, the natural zodiac is this Libra, which is the seventh house of the spouse. In this particular chart, it is like the fourth house of the chart also. So combining those themes, the spouse's mother's death had to happen, how that actually opened up during this particular chart. So that's also one more way to look at things. You can always combine the natural zodiac houses no matter what. So seventh house themes of Libra can always be applied with regard to their fourth house kind of themes of the birth chart also. That's also one more simple technique that also gives you good results. So that's a very interesting thing. And as you mentioned, Jupiter is the sixth and ninth house, but of course now the more ceremonials thing has opened up, being the king and queen and all that. So more ceremonial kind of thing. Jupiter is the planet of ceremonies also. So that kind of aspect has been opened up and all that. That's also one more way to look at this also. And Saturn is also involved here. Of course, Camilla was hated for being the partner of hidden mistress of Prince Charles. Though Princess Diana was well loved, she was actually not. For those who are not unfamiliar, for those who are not familiar with Camilla, but you can see how that Acubens karma did play out here actually. How now remember, this is a very interesting point again. Jupiter is actually Kendra or four houses away from Acubens. Jupiter is square from the Acubens also here. Now, though the square is maybe a 5-degree orb or something, maybe border of that, but it's still a worthwhile kind of thing to observe also. So notice that actually. So this Jupiter is also creating this particular effect of a thing. Now here, though you can see how she's getting this queen title, everyone is still hating her kind of thing right now. That kind of thing can still be playing out. So it's that's the other way to look at this also.
Right.
So Acubens could also be considered to be 10th house from Jupiter, which is also playing out in that particular way. Yeah.
And also there, going back to the square you just said, there's another star here in Vishaka called Uruk al-Hai, and it's the heart of the serpent, but the heart of the serpent is in the neck of the serpent, right? And so it's the serpent's constellation that's here. And so interesting that it's activating that as well.
Yeah.
And I would say also that next year when she begins her Saturn Mahadasha, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think, the whole thing of going back 3 times or doing something 3 times, maybe this will bring success for her rather than a bad reputation, because I think she's going to be 75. Hopefully she's gotten through the bad feelings that people had about her in the past, right?
Yeah, Saturn can indicate challenge also. Again, the Acubens, as you mentioned, there can be some challenges, the reputation and all that. So we'll have to see what happens. Of course, Venus and Saturn are also 212 away from each other, which can also bring challenges for the health of the spouse kind of thing also. So that's also one other thing you can see. So we'll have to see what happens then also.
Well, I'm hoping that it'll be transformation, rather than the snake that kills. It'll be the snake energy that transforms for her. I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then this is Alice Keppel, mistress to King Edward. I think this is supposed to be the 7th. Yeah, not the 5th. And great-grandmother, she's the great-grandmother of Queen Camilla. So we don't have a firm time of birth, but we looked through the Mahadashas that day, and she definitely died in Rahu at some point. We were thinking this is probably it, just because this is kind of around the time that she died, like about a month after is when she died here. She died of cirrhosis of the liver on September 11th, 1947. So, cirrhosis, is a lot of times associated with alcoholism. And so that would be kind of a Jupiter, probably kind of a thing. And she's got Jupiter in Pisces with Mars and Neptune in the 8th house of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I would say, yeah, she was probably definitely a partier. And, you know, she was a part of the Victorian era, right? And so this is all prior to electricity, and things were candlelit. And, you know, here in the United States, this was before, you know, federal taxes. And so you had the Vanderbilts and these wealthy families just throwing these massive parties, right? It was a party culture. This was everything that led up to the 1920s and the flappers and all of the gaiety before the Great Depression hit. And then everybody, you know, was humbled, right? So she lived in the era prior to that when it must have been a lot of fun. I don't know. I think I have a lot of, you know, I think I have a lot of ancestors that were very active during this time, because every time I watch movies about this time period, I'm just enthralled. I'm like, oh, if I wish it were like that. I wish we didn't have electricity and internet and all this stuff. And it was like, you know, more simple lifestyle, right? But yeah, she was definitely a partier. Moon and Pushya, she had money around her. And then, you know, 2 months before she died was when Camilla was born. So Alice was in her Rahu Mercury Dasha at that time, and Rahu's in her first house. Well, if it's at noon, we don't disregard this. It's not disregard the first house, but Rahu's in Maga, which is about royalty. So it was definitely her destiny, you know, to be tied up, especially her money tied up with royalty, right? Mercury rules the second house, Amarika house. Well, again, I would say actually correct this to the third house from the moon. And, you know, this shows her being, you know, very active socially, and that it was actually accepted socially for her to be with the king. And that was the thing that, you know, I wonder what happened prior generations. That's what I would want to know, because we don't have a lot of information about the behavior. Well, we know that, you know, let's say, you know, King Henry VIII, we know he had all of his wives. We know he dissolved the church, or left the church and created the Church of England in order to marry again. We know all of that happened, right? But it seems that people became more accepting after that time. So I think it probably was the Victorian era that made people become more prudish and not accepting of the king having a mistress. They'd been doing this for hundreds of years. You know, why all of a sudden, you know, why this romantic notion that you have to marry your love interest? That's the question we need to ask. And I think that's something probably in India they've had to deal with a lot longer, you know, because of arranged marriages being around so much longer than the British royal family. So what do you think about that? Like,
Yeah,
how have people negotiated these waters in India?
well, in India, kings used to have money, right? So it was a normal thing, actually. So you're right, actually. But of course, families and all that, it said that ever since the time of Lord Ram, this one patni or one wife rule became the norm after that. But after that, it was normal before that for multiple wives to have to be given to kings. It was more like marriage would happen for political reasons and so forth, just to maintain peace and all that. But like I said, it in the history of India, that was a common thing. But then, of course, you know, many times it was arranged marriage for women. The men would have a lot of mistress and all that. That kind of thing was there. So it was, though it was not well looked, but it was still an act. It's just normal human thing going on there, actually. But yeah, but what I would say here, though, here in this particular chart, what is interesting further is that you can actually make Rahu as the ascendant to see the future lifetimes karma and all that. You know, so when you make Rahu as the ascendant, you can see Jupiter and Mars is going 8 houses away. Sun is in the 9th house and all that. Sun is the lord of Rahu. The sun is in Barni Nakshatra and all that also. So you can see in general, moon as the moon lagna, Saturn is going to Scorpio sign. So the partnership or the relationship is actually in a hidden manner kind of thing you can see. It's not like publicly you cannot be with your partner kind of thing. Scorpio is a dark sign after all. So that karma is something you can see. Venus is also 12 from moon, which also indicates this kind of hidden from the partner kind of thing going on. But what is interesting is that Rahu being in Maga is pointing to a royalty karma actually. So that's also one interesting karma. So being part of the royal family, being linked with the royal family, one way or the other. So it is very fascinating to see how the grandmother, one of these grandmother's karma is being passed on exactly similar, along similar lines to Camilla. So could be that the relationship with the grandmother who had with the King Edward could be that Prince Charles was a reincarnation of Edward also. So that King Edward, kind of thing was actually playing out. And of course, similar kind of thing had to play out. Similar kind of karmic pattern had to play out until it kind of eased up is what I would actually have to say. So like each generation, you can see this kind of thinking also. So if you look at this chart, you can see the Rahu's in Maga. But if you look at Kamila's chart, you can see that Rahu is actually going into Taurus sign also.
Right.
It's very interesting kind of thing also. So you can see how each generation, there is a planet in Scorpio even in this chart also. Ketu is in Scorpio kind of thing, points to that historical thing going on. History in which there was a hidden mistress of sort and all that. Now, not Ketu in Scorpio can mean many things, but here it's a combination of multiple things actually. And of course, you can see the same Venus is also playing out. So the same relationship pattern which happened in terms of Venus is in Gemini for Camilla, Venus is in Gemini also for her grandmother. So something similar in terms of relationship is also playing out actually. So it's a very interesting thing to see. When you look at superimpose your every subsequent generation's chart, like your mother's chart, your grandmother's chart with your chart, you will many times you'll see a common pattern of planets coming, repeating their placements and so forth. That kind of indicates the karma that is being passed down through the lineage also. And more importantly, you can see how the Rahu here is also playing out. But yeah, but from an Acubens perspective, you can see how the same karma for Camilla, the karma of being wild, being called as a scandalous woman and all that she had that particular karma to play out and so forth. Perhaps you could say that her ancestor, her grandmother was also involved in something similar. But that karma, sometimes the karmic clearing might have to be cleared out, in certain lifetimes and so forth. So eventually,
I can't
just that sad.
remember if it's her
Go ahead.
father's or her mother's side. I think
Yeah.
it's her father's side because look, watch this. So the mother of the father, right, ninth house, and the fourth is here. So I bet you it's the father's side because that would be the grandmother here.
That's right. Yeah, that's more inclined, more likely to happen. Yeah, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting exercise to see what Rahu and Ketu of the ancestors are doing, how they are interacting with their dissonance chart. Many times you'll begin to see a very common thing actually. You'll begin to see a lot of common thing happening. Usually Rahu Mars conjunction can also indicate challenges and so forth, after
Well,
the
and this
birth
whole
also.
storyline, you're right. The whole storyline in the sky of Mrigashira, of chasing, of incest,
So yeah.
of Rohini, the preferred one, Kritika, the warrior who's misunderstood and accused of adultery, right? I mean, the whole story plays out right here like a book, ending in Ashlesha. So, I mean, if you just pay attention to the myths around where all of these planets are, I mean, it's like, it's crazy, it just matches it perfectly.
Yeah, no, definitely. Rahu, Mars, and Venus, and Ardra, and all that is also indicating the same story. So, and the way to interpret utilize is that when you see a planet in Australasia, then you see other additional planets here, Magshir and all that, then perhaps you could say this particular story aspect could be coming alive more truly. So, of course, Saturn in Australasia itself is a tough emotional karma. So that did play out. So she did face a lot of public criticism and so forth because for her to find her emotional security kind of thing. a good chance that Charles and her also had a past life link. So what if you? I think if I'm not mistaken, Charles has a moon in Ashwini thing going on. If I'm not mistaken, so that's the other aspect. So usually you'll find Ashwini nakshatra or Ketu ruled nakshatras in general will connect more with Rahu ruled nakshatras. You'll be able to see that also. So that's also one of the things that indicates that there is a multi-generational karma, multiple lifetime karma going on also. So that possibility definitely cannot be neglected actually. But yeah, usually Cancer in general is the queen sign. Eventually they end up being the queen kind of thing anyways. So that's that kind of karma will play out eventually. So that makes sense. Karma is royalty and all that. Cancer is also royal sign, just like a Leo. So Leo is definitely the royal sign because it's ruled by sun. Cancer is the queen of that king actually. So that kind of aspect you can see more because both are luminaries actually. Luminaries are planets that give off its own light. So sun and moon are the only grahas that give their own light actually. So royalty is a normal thing with Cancer. So positions of power, positions of prominence is a very normal thing for Cancer and Leo natives actually. So they're more likely to be, though here we have a pure example of a queen in which someone who actually rose up to the, second most position, important position in the country, at least in a monarchical sense. You can see that happen to her only with time. So how Saturn on the Lagna also that it is true for a long time she actually had to wait 60. She had to literally wait until 60 years of age and so forth just to clear out that karma. So eventually she did end up being queen and all that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the royal family in the future generations and so forth also. Now that
Well, and thinking about her past, I think, as we switch roles, right? So probably in the past life, she was the man or she was the one, in charge or whatever. And it was Charles who couldn't be with her in whatever capacity as a woman or whatever. And so this time they flipped roles,
Yeah, it is a possibility. It is a possibility worth considering also. We'll have to see. But yeah, but usually with royal family, multi-generational karmas do exist. For instance, you see that's the most evident thing. Like I believe, as you mentioned, with the King Edward in between. The King Edward VII was the one whom the grandmother was the mistress to, but King Edward the Eighth was the actual the one who actually gave up the particular title so that he couldn't be with a widow and all that. But interestingly, you find something similar has actually happened in the current royal family generation also, like how the Queen Prince Harry actually gave up his role also. So you're seeing the cycle of karma coming back to the family actually. So how the Queen Elizabeth got her royalty because King Edward abdicated. But then now the next generation is having one of the family members abdicate that particular role, so that eventually it might be passed on to someone else and all that. So it could be circling around and so forth actually. So it's a very interesting karma to see. But yeah, key thing is that the key takeaway is that you'll begin to see karma passed down through generations. And in my opinion, it's very interesting find again Katya to see her great grandmother's chart who was actually literally playing out a similar lifestyle actually. So of course, as astrologers, we could see that kind of karma repeating. It's a normal thing for us, but something very important to identify also. Now here, in my opinion, again with the Acubens part, if you go to the original slide, the first slide where you're discovering Acubens, the scandal part was something you can see how that was inherent. Now we don't know what the grandmother's moon's position is. Could be that she might have been Pushya, could be that she might have been in Astrology also. So perhaps she might have been closer to Acubens also. So perhaps that is also a bigger reason why the grandmother also had to go through that particular thing also. So it's an interesting thing to see. But yeah, but of course, remember the big takeaway also I want to make sure is that just because you have karma need not be that it's always going to be suffering. Camilla, though she did face suffering, she eventually got the result of her thing also, the result of her karma also. She went beyond that, eventually became the queen. That's a big thing also. So sometimes karma can be transcended, and when you go through the karma, you might see something else, something a better thing could be waiting for you on the other side of that. That's a very important thing to hold on to. Usually, many times many times when you read a fixed star thing, you begin to come across as and a very important point, which was mentioned by you again, Katya, like how if you have a lower consciousness thing with respect to that particular placement, then good chance you can actually get into scandals and all that quite easily. But if you have a higher consciousness thing, there is an opportunity for you to go beyond that and actually bring something else also to elevate that particular energy and bring in a more elevated energy into your life also. That's also one more thing I would always advise. So just because you have a planet here, don't say that, oh, I have a planet here, I should go into I should have a scandal. That's the only way my life will work. That's a logical way to think about
No,
that.
it just shows
But
transformation, like a very just
exactly correct.
something poisonous too.
Exactly correct. So of course, could be poison that you got food poisoning, water poisoning, stuff like that. You might have poison in your body, things like that. Could be health kind of thing also. It can mean many things actually. So remember that interpretation of your planets and so forth with regard to placements, definitely you need to look into it. But definitely there will be some challenging karma. This particular degree these natives are to go through initially at least, and then eventually though they'll be able to learn from that poison. They can become master healers and great teachers because of that. And
Yeah,
usually these kind of things.
being
Mhm.
it being a witch hunt, they turn into the
Yeah,
witch healers.
exactly correct. So that kind of thing can actually happen also. That's a big thing to keep in mind when you're studying the fixed star. So of course, in ancient times, they probably lived until 40 years. That's what they would just say. Nowadays, so different time is also different. So we have to look at it accordingly also. That's the other thing to look at. But more importantly, when you identify this particular karma exists, don't fall into that karmic trap. That's what I would actually always advise also. Don't fall into that situation where you become the witch hunter kind of thing. Try to use your intelligence and discriminate between good and bad, not fall into that. That's a much more superior way of understanding and using astrology also, in my opinion. That's what I would
Well,
actually advise also.
well, and it's the old saying about, when there are when people are gossiping about you, or
Yeah,
if you're a celebrity and there's things in the press that are bad about you, they always say, well, all press is good press.
yeah,
So figure out a way to make it work for you. Like, well,
yeah,
hey, they're talking about me, let's make this an issue, and let's transform it. Let's change. This is about change,
yeah.
generational change. So awesome. All right. All right. Well, thank you very much for helping me out with this. I just, we do these things because we like to help people. We want to teach people things that they can, take home and just, incorporate into their own lives. Into, if you're looking at your chart and you see one of these things, then you're going to know some deeper aspects about it instead of just the superficial ego side, right? Because that's what makes Vedic astrology so great, is the spiritual growth.
Right. No, definitely. This is an interesting kind of a thing because, as I mentioned, fixed star astrology is one of the oldest astrological systems that are out there. We can learn a lot from that, without doubt. And definitely, it is if you do easy way to apply that, as I mentioned in the beginning, also look at if you have a planet close to a degree, and you'll be surprised that kind of similar pattern in karma can play out. So, of course, Vedic astrology and nakshatra is already capturing that information, in my opinion. But of course, you can see that being highlighted in a very specific way in this thing also. That's great. So, this is a very interesting thing, Katya. It'll be interesting to see what happens ahead also.
Yeah. And I will say, speaking of yoga taras, um, this is one of them, right? Because
Mhm.
it's on the ecliptic, but we're going to go through some more stars that are not considered yoga taras. And that's the reason why I wanted to do this series, was just to bring light to some of these stars that we as Vedic astrologers don't really know that much about, because they're off the ecliptic, but they still have a story to tell, and they can still be very powerful in a chart. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much. And until next time, hope you guys enjoy the rest of your fall, and namaste.
Namaste. Yeah.